Chapter 20 Lord of Winterfell. Aemond. It had been years since Aemond's last winter, but he was certain it never got this cold back then. Aemond had a childhood memory from when he was 8, maybe 9. He had been in the practice yard with his younger brother Daeron, the two going at each other with wooden practice swords while light, powdery snow fell from the sky. It had been cold, but not enough for any substantial buildup of snow, especially in the yards or practice paths where he and Daeron played knights. There had been no instructor or proper etiquette, only fun. Aemond had been chasing Daeron around the yard, between the frost-tipped practice dummies, past the target posts and towards the stairs, where his brother had suddenly slipped on a patch of ice. Aemond's first reaction had been to laugh. Daeron's flailing arms and startled expressions were hilarious, but the aftermath, less so. Daeron hit his head on the cold stone stairs and the game was over. Aemond had tried fruitlessly to fix it by telling his brother a knight wouldn't cry, but Daeron threw up, the maester got involved, and their mother had been so furious she slapped Aemond for his carelessness. Aemond's brother had recovered though, soon spring had arrived, and then Daeron collected his young dragon Tessarion and left for Old Town to foster with Ormond Hightower, leaving Aemond to practice his swordplay with Aegon instead. It wasn't with any nostalgic fondness that Aemond thought back to last winter. His life had been so different then. Aegon was the king's oldest son, Daeron was fostered with the Hightowers, and his sister Helena had claimed Dreamfire. Their futures had been set on a steady course, while Aemond had been left wondering, what about me? A second son with no claim to an inheritance, no dragon, and even his mother's skin slighted Aemond by requesting the third son to be fostered with House Hightower. Of course they had. Since they couldn't have the firstborn, then rather the third son with a dragon and the middle one without. It had frightened him. Aemond had feared being sent to take the black like Aegon joked, or be made a Kingsguard like his father hinted at. Spending his life pampering to his siblings' every whim? Or the gods forbid his fucking nephews? Was unacceptable. He didn't want to be sent to the Citadel to become a useless grey rat either. For all the maester's supposed wisdom, none of them could even heal a king when their lives depended on it. Back then, Aemond needed to claim a dragon or he'd be doomed. He'd be dismissed the way old King Jaehaerys had sent off the children who took up too much space, as only 3 of his 13 progeny were ever dragon riders. Be it to the faith, the maesters, an early grave or married away. There weren't room for the princes and princesses who hadn't claimed a dragon. But then, his family had gone to Driftmark for Lady Lena's funeral, for the true reason was the king's wish to make amends with his twice exiled but always returning brother, and Aemond's life had changed forever. It had been like stepping into one of the magical tales of old Valyria. He'd met a witch, a giant, seen the heart of dragon fire, and finally claimed a dragon for himself. Aemond rested his weight against Vermifor's side, sinking into the rough scales. Uncaring he'd be reeking of dragon stench, Aemond closed his eyes and soaked in the heat. It felt fiery hot compared to the northern winter around them, but Aemond would rather burn than freeze any day. He smiled to himself, reveling in the knowledge Vermifor, the Bronze Fury, was his dragon, his fire, his wings, his power. The egg they'd placed in Aemond's crib never hatched, but that was because his destined dragon was already born and waiting for him. A sliver and hissing carried to his ears, and Aemond glanced over to Lady Hariel, who stood with Rubius Hagrid, speaking to Vermifor in that strange, inhuman tongue of hers. A sound so unearthly, Aemond sometimes wondered if Hariel may not be more dragon than human. Aemond felt Vermifor's chest reverberating, making the same strange sounds as Lady Hariel when he replied. What does he say? Aemond wondered. At his proximity to his bonded dragon, Aemond imagined Vermifor's feelings slipped into his own, even if it was only hints and not anything that could be translated to words. Though there were moments Aemond could swear there was a second heart beating within his chest, an accompanying pulse in his head connecting him with Vermifor. His dragon's feelings bled into Aemond, making him dream of wide open skies and the sound of beating wings of another dragon following in his wake. What did he say? That Winterfell wasn't this cold during his last visit, Ariel answered, her haunting jade eyes twinkling brightly. King Jaehaerys brought Vermithor here in 58 AC. He was a much younger dragon then. Yes, and it was summer. Ariel chuckled. He also had Silverwing along for the trip. I doubt nobody in Vhagar fits Vermithor's company preferences quite the same way. Hagrid hummed thoughtfully. You should stop by Dragonstone on the way home, Prince Aemond. Let Vermithor have some time with the wife before you return to the Red Keep. Aemond smiled tightly, judging the man far too relaxed considering his precarious situation. I will consider it. Vhagar grumbled across the hill, a long whine which Aemond didn't require Ariel's translations to know meant she was unhappy. Someone feels neglected, Rubeus muttered. Does she? Ariel said skeptically. She's usually so adamant about peace and quiet. She caught Aemond's eye. You'd recall how grumpy she can get about it. Of course he did. Being engulfed within Vhagar's dragon fire was seared into his mind forever. I'll go see to Vhagar, Rubeus said. She's been very moody since we got here. Really don't like the north much. Aemond watched Rubeus as he forced a path through the snow, heading towards the enormous Vhagar. When Aemond turned back, Ariel's good humor had fallen to something more cautious, and a conversation from yesterday flashed within his mind. His illness had left the memory in a hazy tint. The one thing that remained clear was the burning irritation caused by the fact she'd seen him so pathetic. Again. Why did that keep happening? His days as the waste of space of the family were over. After Aemond claimed Vermithor, the talk of making him join the Kingsguard or becoming a maester ceased. His mother had relaxed, seeing that Aemond's Valyrian blood was as potent as that of his bastard nephews. When visitors arrived at the capital, they wished to impress Aemond as much as his siblings. From how Lord Ormond Hightower suddenly suggested Aemond come to visit Daeron in Old Town, or how the Lannisters kept name-dropping several daughters. No one protested if he studied texts of old Valyria, magic, or went to visit the dragons. Now that Aemond had one of his own, those were his rights. Aemond was acknowledged for his true value now. So how come when Lady Ariel looked at him, it was almost as if she still mistook Aemond for that pathetic dragonless boy of 10? The previous day was a little unclear, but he recalled their talk well enough. Ariel claimed House Targaryen was indebted to Rubeus and owed him this clemency. Yet a dragon like Vhagar was worth far more than a castle, lands and gold. Perhaps the deal had been unfair before, but by claiming Vhagar the scales had tipped drastically. Rubeus had taken far more than he was owed, and the House of the Dragon would demand compensation. Aemond didn't want that. Not exactly. He was enraged by Rubeus' short-sighted stupidity, but he agreed with Ariel on some matters. The man was the best dragon handler their house would ever have, and he held Ariel's loyalty. If they moved against Hagrid, Aemond knew in his bones they'd lose Ariel and Norbert too, and with them, their magic. Vermithor hissed at Ariel again, and their exchange went on for a few more beats until she broke off with a soft laughter. It was fascinating to watch them converse, but immensely frustrating too. What do you two speak of now? He's concerned about you. Ariel smiled kindly. Vermithor can tell you've been ill. Why did that make you laugh? Ariel waved a gloved hand. It was nothing, she said, grinning impish. He's got away with words, Vermithor. He always speaks whatever comes to mind. Other dragons don't? They do as far as their vocabulary allows it, but Vermithor stands out. The other dragons are more direct, while Vermithor is very contemplating and often speaks his thought process aloud. At any rate, he wants you to take shelter from this unpleasant coldness. He does. Indeed, so why don't we head back to the castle, my prince? For your dragon's sake. Fine, Aemond agreed. He was far too worn from a simple walk, so heading back inside wasn't the worst idea. He may need to rest for the remains of the afternoon to have the strength to make it through the evening's events. It's for the best. You'll need enough time to get ready for the feast too. I do, but I have less time for it, Ariel said. I'm going to be assisting Lord Kragan before the feast starts. This was news to Aemond. With what? Bernard Stark and his sons are going to profess Cregan as their new liege lord. I will be witnessing it alongside Lord Ellard and some of the other members of the Stark household. I thought it would happen at the feast. It will happen then too, Hariel replied. However, Bernard's been reluctant to let go of the regency, so Lord Cregan decided his uncle is to acknowledge his new lord before both gods and men. Aemond grimaced. Does that mean you'll be participating in some Northern religious ritual? He had little understanding of the heathen gods they worshipped, but he believed it included some kind of tree spirit? Lady Hariel nodded. I will only observe. It'll take place before the werewood in the godswood before the feast. Why do you need to be there? You don't pray to their nameless deities. Hariel fidgeted with her shirts. Because I promise to support his claim. A mere presence in Winterfell does that. Even so, I gave my word. He offered her his arm and Hariel accepted it as they set off back to Winterfell side by side. He liked that he was taller than her now. Had she noticed he was taller than Aegon, Jace and most of his family? Aemond could almost imagine them alone if not for the quiet shadow trailing them. The same tall burly guard had been with Aemond for most of his stay. As they neared the castle, Aemond couldn't help but admire it. Winterfell was grand with an ancient quality, giving the impression its walls had stood steady since the beginning of time and would remain until its end. Yet the lands it stood on left much to be desired. Aemond wondered what possessed the first men to venture so far north, and what madness ailed their minds to keep them living here thousands of years later. Fatigue lingered in his limbs, making each step a struggle, and he silently cursed how nothing was going to plan. Aemond wanted to be the one to locate Hariel, but not like this. He'd only wanted to prove himself and bring her back, not deal with Rubius Hagrid's dragon stealing, visit North in winter, get sick and depend on the hospitality of Cregan fucking Stark, who was, unfortunately, not shorter than Aemond. They were the exact same height, and Aemond couldn't explain why that bothered him, but it did. There were words at the tip of his tongue, a suggestion so tempting to put forth, but held back by unfavorable circumstances and second guessing. It was a coin toss that may solve everything, or it could lose him everything. Them, Aemond mentally corrected himself, lose them everything. Because there was a solution here, wasn't there? It was simple. They could solve the dragon issue the exact same way they'd done the last time Vhagar was bonded to a rider without enough Targaryen blood. Marriage. The first hurdle was the law itself, which clearly stated no man could force another man to marry. They could cave to pressure, but even a king didn't have the right to strip a man of his choice of bride. And Rubius had been adamant against the topic when it had been brought up. Even if Aemond's father was to order the marriage through hard pressure, it probably wouldn't result in children. As Aemond understood it, Rubius was simply too large for it to be feasible, in all ways. For Rubius had never been the one his family intended to bind in blood anyway. There had been enough careless remarks uttered within his vicinity for him to guess their intentions, and Aemond was not an idiot. Binding Rubius through a bride meant marrying a princess or lady out of the family, which would not compensate for the loss of Vhagar, only make the situation more dangerous. Hariel, though, she had the means to solve this dilemma. It was partly why Aemond hadn't gone into a blind rage over Vhagar's theft to begin with. Hariel was always going to marry into House Targaryen, which would bind Rubius and thereby Vhagar back into the fold. It had calmed him down, though it wouldn't be for long. When Aemond arrived in the Great Hall that evening, it was decorated for a spectacle. The tables were set with plates, goblets, roasted meats and steaming vegetables. The steward showed Aemond to a seat at the high table near Rubius Hagrid. The hall was filled with guests dressed in their northern best, attires a lot less colourful and high-necked than Aemond was familiar with in the south. He noted that though the lower level tables were filled up, Aemond and Rubius were amongst the few who'd arrived at the high table. "Am I early?" Aemond asked. "No, my prince. Lord Cregan will arrive shortly," the steward assured him with a bow, before hurrying to see to his duties. The steward wasn't mistaken. Aemond had barely sat down before the guards opened the white oak and iron doors to the courtyard, letting a freezing draft into the hall as Cregan Stark and his company entered the Great Hall. People stood up and began clapping while Cregan led the group along the center aisle between the long tables, the guards closing the door in their wake to keep the warmth trapped inside. Aemond craned his neck and spotted Heriel towards the back of the group by Lord Ellard Serwyn. The applause for the Lord of Winterfell began to calm as the group split off to find their seats, some mingling in the lower tables, though most were at the high table with Aemond. "You look beautiful, Lady Heriel," Aemond said as Heriel was shown to her seat by his side, a servant accepting her fur coat and gloves to bring back to her chambers. The gown underneath was boring, but though it covered anything interesting, it accentuated her slender figure, which had grown womanly since you last saw her naked, a few years back. Aemond was not quite able to hold back a smirk at the memory. She may be magic, but at least Heriel couldn't see his thoughts. She couldn't, right? Instead of going to the high table, Cregan Stark went for a different seat at the end of the center aisle. The old throne of House Stark, where he took his place before it. "Cregan of House Stark, the Lord of Winterfell, and Warden of the North," the steward announced, while people began lining up before their new lord. Cregan was clean-shaven, hair brushed back and dressed in a finely crafted grey tunic with a wool fur spilling from his shoulders. He stood before the high seat of Winterfell, the cold stone throne of the old northern kings with massive armrests decorated with the carved heads of snarling direwolves. Cregan was holding the ancestral greatsword of House Stark named Ice in front of him. Aemond appreciated the ripped patterns along the surface of the largest Valyrian steel blade he'd seen. The sigil of House Stark was depicted on banners throughout the Great Hall. The fireplaces were blazing, torches lit the walls, and the ceremony started. With a few words and a bent knee, Banner Stark gave up his regency of the North to his lord-nephew, witnessed by the whole of Winterfell, a prince and 2 dragon riders. Fortunately, Northerners didn't have the patience for grandiose ceremonies that stretched on for hours. Aemond did, he grew up at court after all, and here he was actually seated throughout the event. The affair was nearly primitive in comparison, though at least it meant the feast commenced much faster. "There has to be enough Valyrian steel in that greatsword for 2 one-handed blades," Aemond murmured quietly, eyeing the 2-handed sword Ice where it rested against Cregan's seat. Valyrian steel was very rare, and only a handful of noble or great houses throughout Westeros boasted ownership of a sword made of the sharp, strong and light-weighted material. The art of creating it had been lost to history, so the most they could do today was remold the old Valyrian steel artifacts created by the master blacksmiths of the Valyrian freeholds. Heriel had filled her plate with roasted goat, while Aemond had just finished his piece of pork. The wenches went around the table pouring wine or ales, and the minstrels had started playing at the side of the hall. Heriel agreed. "His is bigger than yours." "Pardon?" Aemond asked sharply. "Blackfire," Heriel clarified. "As Targaryen's Valyrian steel sword, is it not smaller than Ice?" A little, yes. A good sharp blade can compensate for some, but its full potential can only be displayed when wielded by a true and dedicated swordsman. It's all about skill. I've been trained in the sword by the Kingsguard. My mother's sworn protector has overseen my training since I can remember. That'd be Sir Christian, right? Christian, Aemond said bemused. Your pronunciation is off, my lady. His name is Sir Criston. Criston? She repeated. Surely? I always thought it was Christian. I've been calling him so for years. Heriel frowned. Yet none corrected you. I'm sure it's an oversight, she said, even though her expression was uncertain. I can't recall anyone talking much of Sir Criston at Dragonstone. The Kingsguard on the island are Sir Stefan and Sir Laurent. I've seen them train in the arts and practice with the princesses as well. They're excellent instructors. I know Jace's place with them. Aemond very nearly rolled his eyes. From what he remembered of their childhood, Jace and Luke had never been gifted with a sword, requiring Sir Harwin Strong to come to their aid whenever a spar got too tough for them. They'd never been able to follow Sir Criston's instructions properly. The knight might be of low birth, but Sir Criston was the best swordsman in the Kingsguard. My apologies. I know the Song of Swords isn't a topic of interest among proper ladies. I should not have brought it up. Aemond mused. His mother would have scolded him for bringing up weaponry and violence with Lady Hariel. It wasn't appropriate. That depends on the lady. Hariel chuckled. Queen Visenya was famed for having a very good blade. I've seen Prince Daemon practice with Dark Sister, and Bela is very taken with the sword herself. Aemond looked at her, amused by her casual acceptance and how she'd mentioned a fair point he hadn't considered too often. What of you? What do I need a sword for? Hariel asked challengingly. He nearly remarked about how Hariel would always have knights to guard her, when he caught on to her true meaning. You have magic. Aemond recognized the advantages of that, as well as a dragon. And if all that fails me, I also have a Hagrid. Hariel grinned across the table to Rubeus, who chortled. I don't need a sword either, Rubeus shared matter-of-factly. Swords are a bit out of practice back home. I do have a very good crossbow though. If you do not wield swords in your homeland, how do knights and soldiers protect the country? How is war fought? Aemond wondered. With spells and magic? Rubeus's face darkened. Pretty much, he said somberly. I lived through 2 wars myself. One when I was around your age, the second one when I was grown. They were both terrible, but the second one nearly destroyed our home. 10 years of civil war. Rubeus shuddered, watching Hariel regretfully, who was suddenly quite interested in studying the contents of her goblet. But you have magic, a great power. How could it have lasted a decade? Aemond wondered. Because the other side had magic too, Rubeus said as if that should have been obvious. Aemond tried but completely failed to imagine it. It's a bit like back in 42 AC, when Maegor the Cruel battled his nephew Aegon the Uncrowned above the God's Eye. Hariel said quietly, taking a sip of her wine. Just as both sides had dragons there, both sides had magic back home, both aided in battle by very destructive powers. The event Hariel spoke of was the only time in Westeros there had been a battle between dragons. The first time dragon was pitted against dragon since the fall of the Valyrian Freehold, when Maegor usurped the crown after his older brother's death, killing his nephew and rightful heir to make himself king, and proceeded to rule Westeros with terror for 6 years and 66 days until he was inexplicably found dead on the Iron Throne. Battle may be too strong a term, Aemond said. There was hardly much competition. Maegor was riding Balerion the Black Dread, who only needed 1 bite to kill his nephew Aegon and the dragon Quicksilver. But imagine if Aegon the Uncrowned had been flying Vhagar during that battle instead, Hariel said. Would it have been the same battle then? Aemond considered it. Balerion would have won regardless. He was unbeatable. The largest and most dangerous dragon in the world. Vhagar is a powerful queen, but she was smaller and younger. Even if Aegon the Uncrowned had ridden Vhagar, he'd have lost to the usurper. Don't think bigger and meaner is all that matters, Rubeus said. An ironic statement coming from a man his size. Rubeus smiled warmly at Hariel. You know that better than anyone. Or what, Hariel? Girl who lived. What are you referring to? Aemond asked. Rubeus glanced between Hariel and Aemond repeatedly. You've never told them, Hariel? No, she said quietly. Neither have you, though. I thought they already knew. It took me a while longer to learn the language after all. Hariel grew visibly uneasy and shook her head. It never came up. Told us what? Can we please not talk of this now? This is a happy event and what happened back home hardly matters anymore. Not here. Hariel bit out and stood from her seat, brushing down the seizures on her gown. Excuse me, I see Sarah. Hariel walked around the raised platform of the high table, down to the lower tables to meet a dark-haired girl. The minstrels had changed the music to something merry and playful, so people had begun to dance along the middle aisle to an unfamiliar northern tune. What was that? Aemond inquired. Hariel's right. It's not the right story for a name day feast, Rubeus said guiltily. I'm only concerned, Eamon pressed, dying to know more but masking it with something more polite. I did not intend to upset Lady Hariel. Oh, alright. It's her parents. They were killed by the, He was the leader of the opposite side of the war, and Hariel was the only one to survive. And I mean the only one. The Dark Wizard. Their parents. Even their home was left in ruins. Rubia said. There was some mysterious magic happening that night. Not even us wizards understood it. I dug her out of the rubble myself. Perfectly fine except for that cut on her forehead left by that evil git when he failed to kill her. Haven't you wondered where she got her scar from? It's from that night. She was known as the girl who lived after that. The confusing mental image of Rubia sticking out a child-sized Hariel from some ruins was interrupted when, to Eamon's alarm, Rubius's black eyes started misting with tears. Surely he wasn't about to start crying like some craven page. Had the man no pride? Rubius sniffed loudly, reaching into his pocket for a handkerchief to blow his nose. Sorry, I just get so sad. James and Lily were good people, best witch and wizard their age. It was terrible what happened to them, just terrible. The enormous man dabbed his eye with one hand and reached for his goblet with the other, emptying it in one swing, though the serving wench was quick to refill it. Lost for a reply, Eamon's attention drifted down the table, accidentally catching Ellard Serwin's eye. The heir to Castle Serwin sat only a couple seats away, and judging by his uncertain expression he'd overheard most of that. Reflexively, Ellard's gaze flickered towards the crowd, and when Eamon followed his line of sight his stomach lurched unpleasantly. Hariel had joined the crowd along the middle aisle and was dancing with Cregan Stark. Her earlier irritation gone without a trace, exchanged for bright smiles and doe-eyed admiration. They followed the steps in tune with the crowd, Cregan taking Hariel's hand to lead her through a circle, but then he pulled her far too close to be appropriate afterwards. His head bent down and... Did that dog just whisper something in her ear? The bashful smile on Hariel's face made Eamon feel sick and his mind frustratedly disjointed. Surely she couldn't genuinely like... Hariel was far too good for... What did he have at... Cregan was a horse-faced, slow-minded twat! Rugged, grim, dreary-eyed as a brick without a drop of Valyrian blood. So why did she seem so content with Cregan's attention? This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Was Rubius going to allow such behavior to slide? What of her honor? Had he even noticed? Rubius sat at an awkward angle to see, so he probably hadn't. I'd advise you not to drink in excess tonight, Rubius, Eamon said. Seeing as the new Lord of Winterfell has been installed, I intend for us to return south as soon as possible. Huh? But you're sick. I think you need to rest more before flying again. I've recovered enough. You might not be stuck in bed anymore, but you've been coughing all day, and I think you just got worse. Do you feel warm? Your face turned red again. Did the head pains come back? Frankly, right then, Eamon knew no pain but that northern pain in the arse whose name was Stark. No more than I can handle. Should Eamon step in and remind Cregan of his place? It was Eamon's duty, wasn't it? Both to his house and for Lady Hariel's honor. It wouldn't do for the new Lord of Winterfell to make a blunder he couldn't undo. Flush with his succession success and giddy on strong wine, Cregan Stark might see fit to forget. Hariel wasn't his to covet. Like Aegon and his damned whoring. Typical firstborns. As if House Targaryen would ever give the North dragons. If Cregan Stark did not understand that reality, it didn't bode well for the future leadership of the North, did it? Eamon raced from his seat, not sure what he'd do, but quite certain just being down there would stop the unbearableness he was being forced to witness. He'd only reached the steps from the raised platform when Ellard Serwin intercepted him. Joining the dancers, my prince? Ellard asked, following him down to the center aisle where the crowd was getting rowdier and livelier with the festivities. No, but if I was, I'd ask someone prettier than you for a turn, Eamon said. Eyes searching the people, but down here at the lower floor, Hariel and Cregan effectively became lost in the crowd of dark-haired people. Ah, the ladies will be devastated. There are several in attendance who's dying for a dance with the dashing dragon prince tonight. Ellard smiled, but it came off more stressed than genuine. Forgive me for prying, but are you an... Ellard's servant floundered for words and then spoke quickly. I was under the impression Lady Harriel was not betrothed yet. Aemon smiled blandly. She's not. According to the law of her homeland, she won't be until she's turned 7 and 10 either. Is Lord Stark aware of that? He asked plainly. Ellard blinked. I do not think he's aware, though it hardly matters. Cregan is an honorable man, my prince. He'd never dishonor a lady, especially not Lady Harriel. What do you call his behavior, then? Ellard had seen them as plainly as Aemon had. Whispering in Harriel's ear and keeping her indecently close for the type of dance they were supposed to be doing. It's only a dance, and from where I sat, Lady Harriel looked quite charmed with. Careful, Lord Serwyn. Aemon snapped. My apologies, but it's only a dance. This evening is a big event for Cregan. Ellard stressed. It's a pardon, but do you not know? Cregan is betrothed to Lady Ada of House Norre. Aemon's retort died on his tongue. Oh. The relief was instant but relatively short-lived. What the fuck did that matter? Harriel was magic made flesh, a lady-in-waiting with a dragon dowry, a far more valuable bride than some Northerner from the mountain clans. Of course Cregan's closest friend would call him honorable, but Aemon had seen enough to know better. As if his brother Aegon had ever let his betrothal stop him from getting his cock wet. Aegon had been promised to Helena for years, but never refrained from seducing girls right in front of his betrothed, slighting their sister constantly and publicly, or fucking any female within grabbing distance of a bed. I'll inform Cregan that southern dances aren't as... I'll make sure he switched to water, my prince, Ellard suggested hopefully. It was fortunate for the new Lord of Winterfell his turn had come to an end. The group dance required partners to change out for the next in line, so when Aemon finally got sight of them again, Cregan was dancing with a dark-haired girl Harriel had talked to earlier. Sansa? Well, Harriel's new partner was the youngest star cousin. Why had Harriel given that dog her attention? Yet as offended as it made him, that display was only the latest of several clues, and he loathed the picture it painted. Aemon had not foreseen this hurdle. That Norbert would be so damn drawn to these snowy wastelands. Not that Harriel would walk around cold, bitter Winterfell with a spring in her steps. Preening at Cregan Stark was soaking it up. It was fucking disgusting. Was this a strategy from Harriel's side? A scheme? Was it the grandeur of Winterfell? Did she wish to be the lady of her own keep after House Targaryen had rewarded Rubius any land for the dragons he'd hatched? Aemon swallowed down bile. It may have been Mucus too. His king father had actually considered rewarding lands along the Cracklaw to Rubius after he hatched the first 2 dragons at Dragonstone, but the council had advised against it. How could Rubius keep up his duties to the realm if he was living somewhere other than Dragonstone or King's Landing? If he had lands, that would make him Lord Rubius Hagrid, and wouldn't that give him too much power? He had magic and access to a she-dragon that very well may lay eggs. Without trusted blood ties to bind him to the crown, that could much too easily end in a war of dragons sometime in the future. So the matter was laid to rest and no grievances came forth from Rubius either. For that decision was made before they knew Rubius wouldn't take a wife. That any inheritance of lands or castle would pass to Harriel. And since ladies couldn't hold lands themselves, it would pass to her future husband and their firstborn son. One thing was for sure. The souls damned to the 7 hells would burst into harmonious song before Aemon allowed that son to be of Stark blood.